Okay, welcome everyone. Hello, Pop Fisher. Hello, Ararat. How's everyone doing tonight? Hello, Freya, Oski Chess. All right, excellent. So I heard there might be some new people tonight who might be coming in. Welcome. Well, it's time to start. So let's go ahead and get started. I am of course Nate Solon. I've done enough of these now. I don't know if I need to keep introducing myself, but maybe I will for the video. I'm a FIDE master and coach. um, Thank you to chess.com for sponsoring this. So the theme for today is improving pieces. I'm sure we'll have some more people, in fact, more people coming in as we speak, but I want to get started for the people who are on time. So yeah, let's get into it. So yeah, the theme today is improving pieces. I find this to be one of the most useful and universal strategic concepts. And there's a lot of strategy in chess that's very specific to an opening or a pawn structure. But the idea of improving your pieces is useful in almost every position. So, if you're stuck or at a loss in a position, this is a good thing to think about. Um, improve your pieces and especially improve the worst place piece because you just have more to gain, right? If you take a piece that's already well placed and you move it to a great square, you might gain a little bit, but not that much. But if you can take a piece that is not playing at all in the game and give it a useful job, it's almost like you took a piece out of the box and put it on the board on your side. It's really, really valuable. Um, so we're going to look at some examples, starting off relatively simple, and they'll get a little bit more complex. But here it's black to move. I'll do this as a quiz. Why not? All right, black to move. All right, Pop Fisher, Richard, Ashwin, John Sam. um, all right, yeah. A lot of people suggesting best move in the position, knight f6. And the idea is like I was just talking about. Take this knight, which is on the rim. We know that's not good, right? And bring it back to a more useful position. It's headed to e4, maybe d5. Um, Someone said this is not a master game. No, this was an online game. Yeah, not master level. Personally, I collect games. I collect positions from my students' games of all levels, so mostly not masters. I kind of find that often the lower level positions are more valuable unless you're already, like a master plus, like a really strong player. But the idea here is just to give this knight a useful job, and even maybe to attack. What is the weakest point in White's position? What weakness does White have here? Yeah, I'm seeing. I mean, multiple reasonable answers: e4, c4, c3, all reasonable. Um, e4 is looking like a useful square for our knight, gaining a tempo on the queen. Not technically an outpost because White does have this f pawn that they can move at some point, but for the moment, e4 is a useful square. C4 is a weak square because White can't ever defend that with a pawn, and then c3 is a backwards pawn. Um, so I was thinking of c3. One of the other most useful concepts, um, not one we're focusing on today. Today we're focused on improving your pieces, but another really useful concept is to think about where the weaknesses are. In this case, the c3 pawn is weak. So taking our worst piece and bringing it to a better position to attack the weakest point in our opponent's position, that's working on a lot of levels. So this knight can move here. Now, White should probably anticipate this knight coming and get out of the way with something like queen b2. So it's still a game here, but after something like this, we at least took that knight on the rim and traded it off. And now you could play something like queen d5, thinking about e5. Of course, you could argue in the starting position that our worst piece is actually this bishop since it's restricted, but there's not an easy way to improve that at the moment. So you need a realistic plan to improve the piece. One move, let's see, what else was suggested? F4, I don't know. After bishop takes f4, I'm not really seeing what we're getting for that pawn. Rook a4 is reasonable, looking at this potential weakness, but on the other hand, the rook is pretty good on c4 looking at this weakness currently. So this is actually a good example of you're trying to improve a piece that's already good, which, hey, maybe the a4 square is better. I could possibly buy that, but it's going to be more profitable to improve a piece that is currently not doing anything first. A few people also suggested, let's see, g5, maybe thinking about g4. Yeah, I mean, g4, g3, that's kind of interesting, but you do always want to be really careful about opening lines to your king. That has a way of coming back to bite you. By the one move, probably this is too, no one suggests that this is too strong of a class, but sometimes if I show this to weaker players, they want to play d5 to make this into an outpost. But this is kind of working opposite to our purposes of this is improving the opponent's pieces, because that d pawn was restricting both their minor pieces. So this would be quite a bad idea. But okay, enough about I think we spent enough time on that one. Let's move on to the next example. All right, this is black to play. We'll do this as a quiz as well. All right, Pop Fisher got this one. A few people got the first move, which is Ashwin Michael. Your solution is also quite good. Not exactly the full solution I said, but when we're talking about strategy, sometimes the differences between these moves are small. All right, and Richard, John, Sam, R-Rat, Oski Chess, Jazz K, RKDK, all getting it. Excellent. Okay. So thinking of improving the worst place piece, Adi Chess asking what's wrong with bishop g6. Yeah, we'll get to that in a minute. Well, I would argue it's this bishop here blocked in by our pawns. Looks like possibly a French. So if you play the French here, you're familiar with having this bishop that you need to find some way to activate. And a typical maneuver, bishop e8, preparing to pop out this way. So white played rook c1, and then here, what's wrong with bishop g6 here? Well, nothing. Bishop g6 is a good move, but I think it's even better to play bishop h5 and first provoke g4 and then drop back. Because this g4 move is just a big weakness for white, loosens the knight on f3, weakens the king. No real upside to that pawn push for white, so just to provoke that. And we can see that just in a couple moves, this bishop went from having no job at all to forcing white to really weaken their king, and now being on this beautiful diagonal, controlling all these squares in white's position. So yeah, it's already looking really good for black. So a lot of people found this maneuver. A few people wanted to play um, rook takes f3, which this can be a thematic sacrifice in the French, but after queen takes f3, well, you sacrifice in exchange. That's a pretty sizable investment. The e5 pawn is still defended. Knight d4, I guess just queen d3 doesn't seem. I don't think as black our pieces are really ready for an all-out attack at the moment. So there's no need to give up material just yet. Several people also wanted to try to maneuver this knight to a7 or b6, which it's on theme for today. It's a maneuvering concept, and if we could get this knight to c4, that would be pretty cool. So that's maybe something to think about in the future. But for the moment, well, a worst place piece, the knight is doing a decent job here, looking at e5, looking at d4, whereas this bishop really doesn't have much to do. So the bishop's worse in the moment, and there's a quicker path, a more direct path for this bishop to get in the game. So we can start with the bishop, although something you often do, something that works very well, you improve the worst place piece, and then you kind of move on to the next piece, and you improve the pieces one by one until your position is overwhelming. So we could think about maneuvering that knight at some point. All right. Let's see. Okay, this one is white to play. All right, Oski Chess, hello Lilies, awesome Owen. Phineas, GM times 2. Well done. I don't know if you guys, there's dogs barking outside. I don't know if you guys can hear that. Okay, yeah, in this case, it's another one with a bishop, actually. This bishop, we would love to, right now it's just kind of looking at our own pawn, not doing anything. So a great move is h4, getting ready to line up with multiple black major pieces. Very hard for black to deal with. Some people also suggested bishop f1, which, you're thinking along the right idea of improving the bishop, but the more efficient way to do it is to use the pawn to open up this diagonal. And actually, this is so powerful that it's very difficult for black not to just collapse immediately. Probably the best they can do is queen e8 and rook e7, and at least they're sort of not losing material yet. But obviously, this formation with the pieces all scrunched back here is not great. And this could be an example, now that we've improved the bishop, now maybe we could think about improving the next piece. Like in the initial position, a few people suggested knight moves like knight d2 or knight h4. So we can now think about improving the knight, maybe knight d2 now, and swing it around even to d5 would be a good move. See, Osti Chess suggesting rook b8, intending rook a8. This also looks very powerful. Yeah, very, very hard for black to even survive, actually. Yeah, it looks like rook b8, rook 1a8. It's really tough to see how black can even deal with that. So maybe the knight is not even necessary in this position. RKDK suggesting black could just go into like full turtle mode, I guess. So yeah, maybe now we bring the knight, right? But as you improve each piece, you force your opponent to be even more passive. So it sort of snowballs from there. Okay. right here, very close position. Looks like black is intending knight f4. So you can think about how to deal with that. All right, Arat, Fish, Fianchetto, awesome, Owen. Very nice. Yeah, a good maneuver for white. So knight f4 is coming, and looking at g2, but a great way to defend that while also improving the pieces is knight f4. Jazz K says f5 looks inviting. Exactly. This is the weak square in black's position. So by maneuvering the knight to e3, we defend g2 for the moment, but we are ready someday to jump into f5 as well. And yeah, no one. I'm glad no one went for bishop takes f4. Yeah, probably too strong of a class to do that. Although sometimes that is tempting to players who are not quite so strong as you guys. But this is actually positionally disastrous because it opens up the bishop's diagonal and also the e5 square, which black could even maneuver a knight to. Speaking of maneuvering. So 93, and black is kind of, they've got one piece in our territory. But that's about it. Let's do, just to suggest one more, like suppose black just waits. What would your plan be here as white? I'm not doing this as a quiz, just oh, I guess knight, yeah, let's say queen d7, just to not make knight f5 so easy for you to gain a tempo. Yeah, knight f5 maybe. But okay, suppose black. Yeah, maybe h4. Maybe you can just play dynamically here. Yeah, all reasonable. Just one idea I wanted to suggest is we could even, what I would like to do in the long run is play g3. So you could even think about f3, bishop f2, actually improving the bishop because your pawn break in this position may be c5, and then eventually play g3 and kick that knight out, maybe after h4. But you have a lot of options here. Black's kind of stuck, so we can maneuver slowly. Okay, here's one of I had this entitled Tuesday versus I think this is Steve's Zirk as white. I did not find the right plan here, in fact. All right, Santosh, Ashwin, hello, lilies. Nicely done. All right, this one's a little trickier. I'm seeing more different answers here. In ASCII chess. All right, yeah, a few people went for, well, first of all, I think the weakest piece in the position is pretty clear. It's this bishop. Our queen is nicely placed, uh, doing, defending, attacking, controlling a lot of squares. This bishop is great looking at both sides of the board. This bishop is not doing much. So, but then the question is how best to improve it. I think in the game I played bishop e2, trying to eventually move it here, but that's not the most efficient way to do it. So several people went for bishop e2 or queen b3 first, which I guess you are threatening bishop b6, but maybe black would play knight d7. And if black can play bishop c5 and trade a pair of bishops, um, that would be a win for them because we've got the bishop pair, so they'd like to eliminate that. Yeah, so the most efficient way to do this is actually to play c3, and the idea is the bishop is going to go d1 to b3 and pop back out. You could also play bishop d1 first. It probably won't make a difference. I think c3 first looks a little more flexible to me. And then, well, black could play many things, but they can't stop this plan. So for instance, bishop b3. So, okay. I mean, there's still a lot of game to be played, but we took that bishop that was essentially doing nothing, and now we are piling up on f7. Black's queen is tied down. Remember that idea of take your worst placed piece and point it at your opponent's weakest point, which you could argue is f7 here. So it's a step in the right direction. Okay. And yeah, good point. Oski chess, like one issue also with moving the queen is it, for the moment it's, oh, is my camera back? Sorry, my app is just doing something weird. Just a moment. Sorry guys, my camera app is just suddenly doing something weird. Let's see, we might have to, let's just do this. Might have to proceed without the video. I haven't had any issues with, how about, oh, what the, okay, I'm sorry guys. I guess we're gonna have to continue without the camera for the moment. I don't want to waste all our lesson time troubleshooting the technology here. That is annoying, but okay. Well, I think the chessboard is the more important thing anyway. Okay, so c3, bishop coming over. What else? Yeah, queen b3 we already talked about. Several people suggested g4. Yeah, not totally crazy. You're kind of gaining some space, but I don't think chasing black's knight is super valuable. The knight's not that well placed on f6 anyway, so the knight would be reasonably happy to drop back. And yeah, you do want to be really careful about weakening your king. I think this g4 idea can work better. Actually, once this bishop is over here, restricting black even more, you could think about at some point starting to push the king side pawns. That's something you often want to do when your opponent is very tied down so that they can't counterattack your king. So maybe at some point you could do that. Let's see, any other moves suggested? Bishop g5. This one, remember, we want to improve the worst piece. This bishop on e3 is actually well placed, controlling both sides of the board. And even if black played h6, I don't think we want to trade this for a knight because it would give up the bishop pair. So probably we would be best advised just to drop back here. So overall, I'd say the bishop is actually better on e3 than g5. All right. This is white to move in this one. Okay, Ashwin, Santosh, John, Sam, Vish, nice job. A few people got tricked on this one. All right, very good. So yeah, the idea, which I think most people spotted, was to get this knight to f5, either via d1, e3, f5, or e2, g3, f5. But you always have to be careful of tactics, or I don't know if you even call this tactic, just a hanging piece. If you move your knight anywhere, e4 is going to drop off, which obviously you don't want, like knight e4, something like this. So before you do that maneuver, you got to play f3. And then you can send the knight to e2 or to d1. By the way, the c5, reasonable move. This is a thematic pawn break for the structure. But in this position, I would prefer to solidify the pawn structure, improve the pieces to the maximum before breaking the position open. And yeah, a few other moves like rook a e1 or king f3 suggested, defending the e-pawn. But if you can defend a pawn with a pawn, that's usually the most efficient way to do it because, well, I mean, just even in terms of thinking about the piece values, a pawn is worth 1, the rook's worth 5. So ideally, you don't want to assign such a valuable piece just to defend a pawn. If you can use a pawn for that job, that's a more efficient way to use your forces. Now, after f3, by the way, I think probably pretty clear that black is not in a great situation. Black has less space. This dark squared bishop is hemmed in. White is headed for that weak f5 square, but maybe we can do this as a quiz as well. What is the relatively best move for black? All right, only one RKBK Chess is the only person who did the move I was thinking of. A lot of you suggested h5, which actually, you know what, you might all be convincing me over to your side. So my thought was same idea, improving a piece. If you want to bring a piece to white's weak squares on f4, h4, you can go knight d7 and try to do something like queen f6 and bring this knight around. And either trade it for white's knight or maybe play knight f4 at some point. But I mean, this is quite slow for sure. Um, I actually, yeah, I like h5 as well. H4 right now. White could uh, go the other way, anticipating that you're going to play h4. Maybe white should play knight d1 and go this direction. And you know, if you do this, you could lock the king side, but white's actually just going to probably go back to the c5 plan and play on the queen side. Um, Nonetheless, yeah, h5, not a bad idea either. Unfortunately for black, the position is quite bad regardless, but also reasonable. All right, this is black to play. This one actually, when I looked at this for the first time, I was quite unsure what to do, but black, after looking at it for longer, black has a plan that I like. All right, Santosh, Ashwin, Michael Dang. Nicely done. Right, a lot of people going for the pawn break, which is not crazy, but it's not my favorite option in the position. I'll explain why in a minute. Let's see if my camera wants to work now after it's been off for a while. Not sure what happened there. Okay, maybe it's back. All right. So yeah, this one's more complicated, but and there's different ways you could approach this with black. So the most common move that a lot of people suggested is c5, and I mean there's a lot of logic to this. This is a thematic way to fight when your opponent plays f4 in a structure like this. Playing c5 often makes a lot of sense because you want to open up the pawn structure and utilize this diagonal to their king that they've opened. So that could often work. In this position, if white just plays something like bishop d2, it's hard to increase the pressure anymore on d4. Um, I've found that this c5 plan work. This can work a little bit better if your knight's still on b8, and then it goes to c6, adding another attacker to d4. So, I mean, you could play c4 here, and maybe, you know, in the long run, if you can get this queenside pawn avalanche going, that could, kind of slow, but potentially effective. At the same time, if you play c4 and take the pressure off of white center, you do have to watch out for some sort of kingside attack over here. Um, so yeah, my favorite move in the position is knight b6, and the idea is actually the knight is headed to d6, looking at, again, this theme, take the worst place piece pointed at your opponent's weakest square. And it looks a bit slow, but it's quite effective. For example, I think this was the game continuing, or this might just be a sample line. And here we're in time to play knight e4, just jamming up everything white's doing and also just occupying that weak square. And by the way, if you have a lot of experience in Carlsbad structures, you might know that d6 is the ideal square for the knight. So often finding some way to get a knight on d6, even if it is somewhat slow, it can be worthwhile. And we can kind of afford a little bit of a slower plan here because position's not completely closed, but the pawn structure is relatively fixed. Yeah, Oski Chess, good question. White can sort of challenge this plan a little bit more by playing g4. And in this case, we're not quite in time to do the whole thing with knight e4, but you could consider just something like knight fd7, maybe even f6 to kick this knight out. And I mean, white wants to attack us, but at the same time, advancing the pawns in front of their own king is risky. White's attacking setup would be more dangerous if they still had a light scored bishop, uh, you know, as a useful attacker. But yeah, good question. White can improve on this. Is probably better than starting with bishop g2, because here at least it's not as easy for us to get the ideal setup. So yeah, I like that idea. Yeah, g4. Yeah, g4 is still reasonable. Other moves. Knight takes e5. I don't like this because this now white is gaining space in the center and getting to use this f file, which is really dangerous. So it's annoying when your opponent has a piece in your territory, like this knight on e5. But in this case, eliminating that is worse than just ignoring it for the moment. And we can someday play f6 to chase it out. Several people also suggested knight f8. So with the idea of improving this knight, but neither of these jumps look all that appealing to me right now. So I like this other route to d6. Okay, and a few people suggested knight e4. Let's see what happens if I guess the idea is a pawn sacrifice to control the light squares. What was your, were you going to follow up with knight f6 or a different move here? Yeah, I mean, maybe something like this and controlling these light squares is kind of interesting. But still, white's up a pawn. And then, let's see, what else? A bunch of different moves suggested. Bishop d6. When a piece is defended by two pawns, adding another piece attacker to it usually doesn't do much because no matter how many pieces we pile up on e5, we can know, there's no way to overwhelm that square by capturing with pieces because the pawn's always going to recapture and be defended by a pawn. So it looks reasonable, but I'm not sure if this move accomplishes much. All right, let's move on to another position. Said, Nate, are these online games? Some of them are. It's a mix. I just have my database of examples. Some of them come from my games. A lot of them come from my students' games, whether online or over the board. Some come from books. It's kind of a mix of everything. All right, RKDK chess, well done. I sort of tricked some people on this one. All right, so far only RKDK chess gotten the full solution. All right, I think, wait, everyone. So this is, right. So far we've looked primarily at examples where we're maneuvering a piece. We're taking a piece and moving it around to a better square. But you can also use the pawns. You want to use your pawns to create more opportunities for your pieces and restrict the opponent's pieces. So that's the idea behind c5. We're restricting this bishop. Whereas you don't, if you play a different move, whether rook fd1, knight b1, basically any other move, black should play c5. And then their bishop gets in the game, and we've lost the opportunity to do this ourselves. So you want to do this immediately. And then the question is just to work out the tactics of, so black's got three attackers versus 2 defenders. And some people suggested knight c4 here, which also looks pretty good, but you can just take, and you're hitting this bishop. And then here's where I tricked a lot of people, I guess, because after knight takes c5, virtually everyone went with rook takes c5, which is probably also quite, I mean, it's probably doing very well here with 2 pieces versus a rook, but better move, only spotted by RKDK chess, nicely spotted, queen b4, and this is just game over because it's not 2 pieces versus a rook, it's just an extra piece, because either the knight will be taken, or if it moves away, the bishop is going to drop. For example, knight here, you could just take that and take the bishop, and you're going to mop up with the extra knight very easily. So queen b4, I guess it's one of those, this is one of the more obnoxious chess coach phrases, like when you see a good move, look for a better one. Not a phrase I've always found to be all that useful, but I guess it applies well here. Rook takes c5 is a good move, but queen b4 even better, just winning a piece. So here, black shouldn't take. Probably their best chance is to play b5, but then you really killed this bishop. So this is already very positive for white. How would you continue with white here? Just do this one in the chat rather than as okay, I'm seeing some bishop takes b5. Let's see, what happens here? So we do this, So that was an even trade. I don't know if I'm a fan of this though, because one of my biggest advantages in that position was precisely that bishop on b7, which was dead, and we traded that off. So after something like this, maybe white's pieces are still a little more active, but definitely not a fan of letting black trade off that bishop. Uh, I do like a4. Now black's probably going to play a6, but we've got, we can just let that sit there for the moment and take at the right moment. Yeah, I like this idea. RKDK suggesting queen c2. This is on topic, on theme for today. Getting that knight to d4 looks nice. I could also see just bringing this knight, this rook over, and waiting to decide. Like maybe we would bring the knight to c3. Maybe we would still try to bring it to d4. One move that was suggested that I wouldn't recommend is f3, just because this weakens this square and weakens a path to our king. So given that right now we have a lot of positional pluses and our position is totally solid, I'd be reluctant to create that kind of weakness around my king. I mean, I see, like, if you can do this bishop is kind of nice, and you get the f file. So there's some upsides to it, but my experience, when you go from a position with no weaknesses and you create a weakness, it makes the game a lot harder to play. So just keeping it there's a lot to be said for just keeping your position really solid. A lot of positional chess, there's if you look at the Hippocratic Oath, like the oath doctors take, the first thing it says, well, it says it in Latin, which I don't know, but in English, it's basically first do no harm. So a lot of positional chess is actually just not messing up your own position. Like if you just don't create any weaknesses, it can be very surprisingly hard for anyone to beat you, actually. All right. Okay, this one is black to play. How many moves should I do? I guess this is fine. All right, Ashwin, very nice. This one is a lot, probably a lot trickier. Or at least the strangest example. I'll say that much. In RKDK chess, nice. And GM times 2. All right, so a lot of people went for rook c8, which, I mean, very reasonable, putting the rook on the open file. But I mean, in the start, so for the moment with black, we're down a pawn, um, and well, our bishop looks pretty good. White's king is somewhat open, but it's not obvious how we can take advantage of that. And meanwhile, White's ready to play knight d3, and maybe start rolling with their center pawns, especially the passed d pawn. So after rook c8, knight d3, I don't know. I mean, maybe we can drop back, but it's kind of hard to see. Like, if White can just start advancing those center pawns and consolidating their king, we might be in trouble, and we are down a pawn. Yeah, so the move, and I just showed this one, just, you know, very unusual maneuver. But sometimes just having these very memorable examples is helpful. Not that you would do exactly this in your game, but it just sort of plants the idea in your head to improve your pieces by creative means if necessary. Yeah, and the idea here is that we really want to get this bishop on this diagonal at all costs, even moving the rook over to support a7. This is actually the engine's touch. Well, there's a few moves that are kind of close, but depending on the depth, the engine actually thinks this is a good move. Not a winning move, but maybe a good enough move for black to keep the balance. So one of the top lines was bishop back and rook c8. So sort of a standoff here. And one way the engine could, or one way the game could go, according to the engine, is if d6 and you trade everything, White's queen is dragged away, and then this could end up in a perpetual, this probably will end in a perpetual check. Well, I have to say, one move I didn't consider in my analysis that I wonder what, if White just plays b4. Just thinking now, I'm not entirely sure what black's supposed to do. This seems more logical. Queen d7. Maybe, actually, yeah, that's a funny suggestion, and maybe the best move. Because if takes, then check and pick up the rook. So yeah, maybe queen d7 and go over to b5. That's another spectacular improving move. I don't know if this is the best move, but I love the idea. All right, let's look at, I've got one more example that's a little bit longer, so let's make sure you've got time for that. Okay, this is from a game, this is from an over the board game, an older game. So clearly, I think, pretty clear White's doing well with total control of the C file, lots of extra space. But black is still sort of holding on for the moment. So, okay, think about how would you improve the position for White? All right, RKDK chess. Nicely done. A lot of people going for the move. This Vera Menchik was White. A lot of people going for the move that Menchik did go for in the game, which not the absolute best move, but like you're thinking along the right track. So in my opinion, the best move in the position is knight b3, sending the knight over here to pressure this pawn, and also maybe thinking about bishop a7 at the right moment. And also just this knight was, I don't know if I would say loose, but maybe you have a piece. It's nice to just have all your pieces safe to free up everything. So yeah, I think knight b3 is my favorite move. A few people suggested h4, which is a very good move as well. This is when you've got your opponent tied down, but there's not an obvious way forward, that's often a great time to advance a pawn, start sending those pawns in to gain space or provoke a weakness, especially a rook pawn. So h4, maybe thinking about h5 if allowed. Maybe bishop h3. Good move. Definitely a very good move. The move that, well, let's also talk about b5 suggested. So yeah, reasonable, although you do give black c5. You give this knight a way to sort of come back to civilization, which is a big downside. So that might be a little premature. The move that most people suggested, though, was bishop e4. So this was played in the game. And, if you're doing that, you're thinking about improving a piece. So you're definitely thinking about the right sort of thing. It turns out this isn't quite as efficient as we'll see in the game, but as long as you're improving a piece, you're on the right track. So this was the game continuation, and she completed this bishop maneuver. The issue with this is I'm not sure if the bishop is really so much better on b3 than on g2. But I suppose there is the idea of pushing the a pawn. So there is some logic to it. Now in the game, black played rook d7. Black actually had a good defensive move to probably save the game here. We can do this as a quiz. All right, Santosh, I like chess re-quiz. Nicely done. Oski Chess, awesome own, Pop Fisher. Yeah, and black did have an opportunity here to play knight a8. I don't know if I would call this an improving move. The knight's not good on a8, really, but the point is that once you kick the rook back, bishop d7, black is just going to be able to contest the c-file and trade off all the rooks. And after that, it's going to be very hard for white to do anything. With just a few minor pieces left on the board, white's space advantage might not be very meaningful. So that would have been good defensive play by black. In the game, she went rook d7, and white simply retreated. Good move, because now this rook is just blocking everything. So she went back, and then we can do, we're almost out of time, but one more. This is a good puzzle to end on. White to play now has some tactical possibilities. All right, requiz, awesome Owen, Arat, Ashwin, well done. Phineas, Jazz K, RKDK. Right, Fianchetto, and let's see. Yep. All right, I think everyone has answered. So yeah, knight e6 check. Pretty obvious candidate move with the check and coming in here. Bishop takes b6. So far an even trade, but two things are attacked. And black's only attempt to not lose material is bishop f5. But white can continue with forcing play to win. So if we just keep going down this line, bishop takes d8, bishop takes c2, and then the key move is bishop c7, hitting the rook. And if rook c8, rook takes c2, also defends. White emerges up a piece. Let's see. Some people suggested bishop takes e7 check, which you're up a pawn, but you know, one pawn up, bishops of opposite color, not an automatic win by any means. So bishop c7 is a little bit better. And then one other funny point of this is if takes, if black was in time to play something like bishop takes d5, they might be okay, except for this is checkmate in one, so you can't do that. And then a few people suggested in asking about e4 here. Okay. This might also be, I have to say that the line starting with bishop takes d8, I think is very forcing. So I would go for that if I saw it. This one is a little more open-ended, I guess, after something like this. Bishop f3, rook e3. Although here, bishop h6, maybe. Yeah, I mean, maybe this is still good for white, but when you get to this point in the line where like there's a lot of possibilities, so this is one thing you have to be concerned about. And even if well, I guess this is probably, you know, being an exchange up for a pawn is certainly not always an easy win. Maybe your rooks are just so active here that it is. But yeah, this line seems a bit messier to me. So I think just takes and bishop c7 is actually very clean, and we don't even have to give up the pawn. So this is the best way to go. Although, you know, white may be better after e4 as well. But okay, well, we'll call it a night for tonight. Thank you for having me as always. And yeah, just remember, find your worst place piece, give it a useful job, improve it. Anytime you're sort of stuck and you're like, how do I make my position better? How do I improve the position? See if you can improve your worst place piece. It's a very practical idea. It works well in a lot of positions. All right. Have a great night, everybody.